Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Keystone Masters. I'm Sowers, your host, and I'm joined today by Automatic Jack, Zyronic, and JB. Starting with Jack, go ahead and introduce yourself.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Keystone Masters. I am Automatic Jack, and it's a pleasure to be here, Cyrus. I'm really looking forward to the games today.
And Zyronic. Who are you, Zyronic?
Hi guys, I'm Zyronic. You might know me from Teemo Mega Snipe from the last MDI, and it's also great to be here.
And JB.
This is
Introduce yourself to the class.
J.B, healer and team captain for Method NA.
All right, so welcome to Keystone Masters, everybody. Keystone Masters is a community-driven event. We hope to bring some fun Keystone races to everybody. This is just the beginning of what Keystone Masters hopes to achieve. Quick shout out to Sierra, who's producing everything behind the scenes, as well as Shine helping us out. And as a disclaimer, this tournament is not run or Blizzard sponsored or operated in any way. This is just, as Derry said a while ago, a bunch of nerds hanging out in Discord for a while, trying to make the dream come true, which of course leads us to thanking Derry for helping us produce such a great event. So what we hope to see tonight is going to be a best of three between two European teams. These guys are going to go head to head in these dungeons. It's going to be really exciting. So dungeon racing, boys, is very different to pushing high keys like you love to do on live. Starting with JB, what's different when you're preparing for a dungeon race event versus when you're pushing for that world first at a Keystone?
So obviously in the MDI format, you have keys that are several, I think usually 5 or 6 Keystone levels lower than what you're seeing on live, which is going to emphasize bigger pulls, faster play, much less risk of dying. And so whereas on live, a lot of times you emphasize classes that are sturdy and capable of taking punishment from a boss. In the MDI format, you're looking for classes that can just blow stuff up real fast and annihilate trash, pop a lot of cooldowns on bosses, and run through the dungeon as fast as you can. So you see some classes that are maybe a little less tanky, but do a little more pew pew. And the name of the game is speed instead of safety.
And so it's ironic. What do you think about that? Speed and safety versus pew pew? Like, tell us a bit more about that speed in the dungeons.
Yeah, it really only comes down to the speed. Like, you spend so much time with MDI dungeons practicing your route, practicing exactly what CC is going to be used in what situations, that the safety is kind of there from practice. So I don't know necessarily about the safety. The safety comes from the practice, but everything you said is 100% dead on.
All right. And so, Jack, this safety versus high push speed, what's it like different maybe for the healer in this environment? Like, what are you looking out for? What's going to be killing these teams in these lower, faster keys? Oh, I think Jack's muted.
Whenever you're going into, sorry, is it good now?
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
There we go. Yeah. Whenever you're going into higher level keys, you're having so many avoidable damage mechanics that if you're standing in them, it's very likely you're dropping low and dying to begin with, no matter how much healing focus there's going to be onto it. So even when you're going into these lower areas, it's also going to be expecting people are dodging these the same as they would on any kind of high level key. And as a healer, you're doing just enough healing to be able to get through the content while just dishing out as much damage as possible. So looking as to where you're actually able to cut corners, to be able to kind of skip around, putting out too much healing if you don't need to, and then being able to dish out a huge amount of damage here. So healer damage can be really heavy. I think we're having Paladin and Rested Druid squaring off against each other. So it'll definitely be a big focus for both teams.
Right. And so, yes, so these maps, of course, it's going to be a nice little best of three here. The MDT routes for both of these matches has already been prepared and will be available into the chat. So teams will be able to follow along and see how each team approached these various dungeons. And I think without further ado, I think we're ready to hop on into the first dungeon. Oh, 1 second. One last thing to mention. Oh, right. Something to mention for everyone in chat. These games occurred 2 weeks ago. So we'll be playing on Fortified Sanguine Necrotic, not live affixes. And of course, can we get an F in the chat for this is like one of the last times that Magic Necrotic happened. From now on, Necrotic is physical. And,
how do you feel about that? How do you feel about it, Cyrus?
It's
how do you feel?
It's a bad feeling, honestly. hopefully we'll see some changes to this affix. There have been a lot of very good changes to dungeons in the past few weeks. We'll see what happens in the Chronic future.
We'll make sure to point out AMSs whenever we can.
Oh, God.
Just for you.
That's right, man.
All right. Cool. All right. Here it is.
All right, without further ado, Zyronic, happy to have you beside me here, is joining in for the game 1 of the Keystone Masters Season 0, Episode 1. Joining in here for Season 0. Joining in for the Talazar. X, you gonna give it to us?
Oh, always giving it to you. It's interesting to see what these teams are going to do here right off the bat, especially on 4. I think we saw in the MDI Global, we saw a lot of people go straight towards the middle and pop their lust on that mid pack. But it doesn't look like either of these teams are going to do that. They're going to the left side.
Yeah, humanoid's a pretty popular pull, I think, on Fortified. You can get a big pull right out of the gate here, grab a lot of trash, and it's a good lust spot right out of the gate.
Yeah, often this is going to be the most common pull a lot of times you see on Fortified, just be able to get it all taken care of. I was interested in seeing if they were going to go after any of the augurs or juggernauts in the back, or try to catch that confessor as it's patrolling away. But I like what we're seeing here out of Drex, doing a great job being able to be the focus of all the juggernauts' rages, making sure he's the only target, having everyone else stacked up and together. Having that consistency as to where all the enrages go is extremely helpful here. You're also going to be seeing the same thing coming out of a team OokOokSquad.
Yeah, we did see them get a little bit of healing from the Sanguine there, but they got it knocked out pretty quickly. Both teams are doing a pretty good job of making sure neither of the fiery enchant casts get off for too long, so they're keeping their overall raid damage pretty low, and they're both dealing with the pack relatively at the same time, actually. It's pretty easy.
Yeah, and I like being able to see the rise really of Boomkins as we looking at it, composition-wise, both teams running with the rogues, one with the demon hunter as well. So, but really the Boomkin, and especially now with a lot of the changes at 8.1, we've been seeing a lot more of those pretty frequently, with seeing how powerful it is to be able to have trees and the support it gives to the tank.
Well, I think you see both teams are going to have classes that can knock mobs out of these Sanguine on these pulls, so I think you'll be pretty safe. Sometimes if you're not running with these knocks, you see Ring of Peace there to make sure that Sanguine's not an issue. So having especially multiple knocks is a big deal. Sometimes one isn't enough.
You've seen as a team Ook Squad running down, taking care of the Sky Screamers along with the extra Sarad pack here, as you are going to be having Team Spaghetti mopping up the rest of those Confessor and Augur packs we saw near the top there. They weren't able to actually get the Fiery Enchant knocked off because they did one Somni's Barrier did end up going up. So incurring a couple, taking quite a bit of damage, I should say, from that, but they're doing a great job keeping everybody alive here. Always important to be able to watch out for just how quickly things can start going wrong when you are missing out onto that barrier here. And instead of going into the middle of the room like Ook ended up doing and starting to look like they're moving towards Razan, Spaghetti is moving on its way towards Volkal's room.
Yeah, it's interesting to see them go a different way here. Usually we'll see teams try to go down towards Razan as quickly as possible just to get a boss kill out of the way, but looks like they're trying to get trash. I wonder if they're just trying to pull that honor guard for the DK tank for some extra. They are doing a pretty big pull here too.
It's usually, you don't typically see, I think, teams go from humanoid directly over to the undead side because of cooldown management. A lot of times you pop everything on that humanoid, and then teams use the sword pulls in the middle to kind of reset their cooldowns. So going back-to-back big pulls like that can be dangerous.
And you're also seeing how long it's taking Team Spaghetti in the bottom left there to be able to start dealing with those mobs and also having to kite away from the location. So maybe they're going to go to Razan right afterwards. They're not backtracking too hard because especially when they were lacking a little bit in some stuns, they were seeing the shield bearers, barriers going up, the Juju barriers going up, and just lasting such a long time as they try to work on kiting all those mobs out of there. But Ook Squad working on getting into Razan here, moving away from the first terrifying visage. Zarnik, you going to talk about it a little bit more with this boss?
Yeah, Razan's a pretty simple boss. There's basically 3 mechanics to it. You have the Terrifying Visage, which is the AoE fear that we just saw them all LOS. Then he targets a player with a fixate, and if he hits that player, he's going to chomp on him a little bit. So you run away from him until the debuff is gone, and then you go back and DPS him again before the next Terrifying Visage, which they're doing right now.
Yeah. Spaghetti is working on a different boss here, going into Volkal's room. Important that they're taking down all of these reanimation totems at the same time. As you're seeing on the right side of the screen, they're able to track all the HP of those totems. They need to die within a few seconds of each other before the Resurrect cast goes off onto them. That way they'll actually be into DPS Volkal. And from that point, he will start spewing out AoE and start slowly decaying himself.
This is a pretty interesting route that they're taking here. I don't think I've ever seen anyone go towards that boss first. I wonder, we're going to see it further on in the dungeon why they went that way, but I'm actually very intrigued by the route.
I think we've seen it a little bit previously with BlizzCon's MDI. If I remember correctly, I think it was Excel's Angels with Sierra. In fact, I think they had something similar where they were going through Volkal's room first. Then they jumped down into Razan's room after they started getting into that like middle platform area, and then started working their way up from there. So, be interesting to see if they just drop down once they actually end up clearing the that next trash pack here, as they will have to use maybe Rogue Skip or Death Skip or something like that to get past that patrol, past the pack that is actually guarding Volkal's room here. So,
I think
interesting to see how they clean that up real quick.
I think this was before they fixed the Warlock gates to let you go through the wall. So I'm guessing we're going to see the Warlock skip. Through the,
if they had one.
If they had one.
They don't. Yeah, they don't actually have a Warlock. Looks like they're going to have
there's a little bit different shade of purple there, right? So they are going to end up having Lave, I believe it is, using his running away and actually trying to get the Vanish skip off. But he does end up pulling a little bit extra trash at the time. So Drex is just moving off to the side, making sure he's going to be in range to get everybody in for the mass res there. But it looked like they just pulled a little bit too closely, or maybe whenever the skip went off, someone just had aggroed at the same time here. But they're able to get the res off. Looks like they are going to lose quite a bit of time in the process here as OokOokSquad is moving towards Volkal's room here and taking down quite a bit of extra trash along the way. So at this point, a little bit slowed down here, Team Spaghetti. They need to take care of this. A more dangerous pack. It can be quite a pain to deal with on Fortified. So chaining a lot of the casters, chaining the stalkers into the rest of the patrol can be quite dangerous on higher level Fortified. But like we mentioned, we're working on a 13. They have quite a bit of gear at their disposal, so that shouldn't be too bad for them to deal with.
Yeah, we've seen Team Spaghetti make a couple pretty big mistakes so far pretty early on here, and in these lower keys, that's going to be, you don't have that much room for error. So as long as OokOokSquad stays safe and does clean pulls, they should take this one. We'll see how it goes.
That's right. And always important to keep yourself safe here as we are watching Team Spaghetti in the bottom left taking down that last pack. But you're also seeing one of the infested mobs getting into the rest of the troll here. The infested stalker looks like they just failed to CC it properly or something. And then the stalker moves right in and starts healing up all the rest of the mobs. Very dangerous here as they have to take on that fortified honor guard. And they're just not able to actually separate the infested from the rest of the group. They're just spamming roots on it, trying to get something done here. But at this point, it's already been dotted up. It's already, neck deep in the waist of all the other mobs. They have to deal with huge ticking damage coming in from the honor guard. If this wasn't a 13, it would just be almost an insta wipe.
Oh yeah, for sure. Fortunately, because it is a low key, they're able to kill the mob. Did they get an infest off there? They got
another infest though on the shield bearer. So even further. And the thing is, like we mentioned, if this was a higher key, wipe for sure. But when you're in these lower keys, you're able to prolong the pull, but to what benefit?
Honestly, this probably should have just been a wipe. I think the time eaten up trying to salvage this was.
Yeah, once they pulled the stalker, they should have definitely just run through and committed a battle res for mass res or something, and just gone. I think this right here kind of makes up for the 2 wipes that Team Spaghetti had earlier, so they're probably on pretty even footing.
Yeah, we'll have to be seeing here as Spaghetti is starting to work onto that middle pack here. They have not killed Razan yet. So I would be looking for them to start dropping down into Razan's pit, probably around this area here, as it does look like the boss is just passing by them. So they might have missed out on their window. They might pull a little bit more trash as they wait for him to patrol around again. Or they might just hop down, as it looks like they're doing right now, and then have to wait for him to come back. So maybe a little bit of missed timing when they are working to try to perfect their route here. But they are going to be able to pull it and start working on their second boss, and the boss that Team OokOok had gotten down first.
Yeah, it looks like they're sitting. Looks like they have about 2 minutes left on their lust. I'll be curious to see what after Razan, after what they come up and use lust on. If it's going to be the middle pull, because I don't think there's anything else. It's necessarily a good lust opportunity here, and it's probably worth keeping in mind with like the Razan timing you mentioned, not being in great position. And I don't know that that the teams, because of this format, have had a lot of opportunity to practice these keys repeatedly. So we're probably seeing teams using strategies that are not necessarily well rehearsed. and you wouldn't see necessarily that same level of repetition and refinement
repetition
that
and
you would
polish
see in the MDI.
Seeing the kind of polish out of a team like Omega Sniped or Method NA previously, they're not quite having there. But also can be quite a challenge with live servers when you're not able to have that constant iteration onto the same key. Not having Keystone deletion anymore to be able to continue practicing on that same kind of affix, same kind of Keystone level to be able to get to where you want to be. So definitely right about that. Team OokOok working on downing the last of these totems, killing them all before the reanimates go off, and killing Vokal here as Spaghetti in the bottom left is almost done with Razan.
You can actually see that Spaghetti also has more mob count right now than OokOok does, and they're going to be getting this boss kill first, so they are quite a bit ahead now after that big mistake by OokOok.
Yeah, I really want to be able to see how they're going to take advantage here. And at this point, they're probably going to do just double Sard packs, start getting those taken care of. They actually do have to take care of the infested first if you want to be dealing with that. And yeah, it looks like they're sitting pretty here, be able to quickly move on to Priestess Alunza's room before teams OokOok will be able to as well. So really nice advantage coming in here.
We got Lust coming up in about 10 seconds, so I think you should be looking for teams to be moving into a pull that warrants Lust, which at this point I think the only thing that makes sense is the middle pull. So that's where I'd guess you'd see it.
Well, also realistically,
I would say so,
right? Go ahead.
I would say so on the side of OokOok as well, or like that you could probably start seeing that. But I don't know about the side on Spaghetti because they have so much mob count left available, or that has already been completed on their end, right? And I don't know if they're actually going to get another Bloodlust afterwards. So it might not make too big of a difference if they're using it now, for example, or if they're going to use it on like the last boss, or they're going to play a very aggressive trash pull or something like that on Alunza
I guess
with
that's
the
true.
boss or something.
On a 13, this might be short enough. You only get 2 Lust.
Yeah.
Holding it,
So
it makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know if the Rogue's Vanish was off cooldown there, or if the polymorph that just happened was just unlucky timing, but that's just another death. 5 more seconds out of the timer, plus the res time. It's really unfortunate.
Having to wait on that just takes up so much time and space here. But you're also seeing, speaking of space, how much is being consumed by Sanguine here whenever they're doing those Sard packs. It's massive puddles that are coming up here. They're doing a great job keeping those Skyscreamer packs on the side of Team Spaghetti out of the way, reducing any kind of healing they have. And it's nice, like you guys mentioned earlier, having so many knockbacks in the group comp. Grips as well, to be able to start moving those out quickly and easily here. Surprised they're not playing a little bit more aggressively there on the mobs. They looks like they could have easily just grabbed in the pack that was just ahead of them, grabbing just the honor, not the honor guards, but the Desarya honor guards. Soldier, it is the honor guards. Yeah. Sorry. Any of the soldiers there to be able to start pulling them in, because you only have to deal with like the tank damage onto it. There's not really that much caster heavy stuff. You just deal with the wildfire cast, and it's not too big of a deal there. So looks like they could have even been playing a little bit more aggressively if they just had cooldowns, or maybe they're holding them for the pack leading up to Alunza.
Well, it's worth repeating that Sanguine and Ataldazar, especially on those bridges with the sword packs, can get very tricky, and I'd say it's one of the bigger affixes in Ataldazar, having to deal with the Sanguine in those narrow corridors and with all the swords jumping around. It's very easy to drop some pretty punishing Sanguine stacks that you have difficulty moving things out of.
Yeah, they're consistently starting to just end up kiting away. You are seeing Bloodlust is available for both teams, seeing what they really want to be able to use it on. And on the side of OokOok, they're taking quite a bit of time to start getting down the trash packs just outside of Vokal's room. They actually ended up taking the Stalkers down separately there. So instead of combining everything up together, they killed the Stalkers first, then they moved down. Looks like they were kind of lacking in stuns to be able to deal with the Shield Bearers, because the Shield Bearers were living for quite a long time there. So at this point, they just need to they got to know that they're behind. They got to know that they got to do whatever they can to start catching up and getting themselves back into this game here, because at this point, they're just so far behind on trash. Even with only a couple deaths incurred, that extra infested that ended up getting into the rest of the group there before they took on Vokal just consumed so much time for them.
Well, it looks like they're setting up for a double pull here, so maybe they're going to try. We'll see.
And this is where
think about how long it's taken.
It'd be, if they can pull it off, it'll be worth it. But Sanguine can be very difficult here, even with Nox, with this many swords out. Even if you can handle the damage, a lot of times you can end up making the pull a lot longer than it needed to be with unlucky casts in Sanguine piles.
Yeah, it looks like, for example, that Sky Screamer just, thankfully they have grip to be able to bring it back in, but the Sky Screamer there healed for at least 20-30% or something, and it got the cast off there, so massive fear.
And they're going to run through Sanguine.
And they're jumping right into Sanguine, right? So that's original Sky Screamer that got burned down to 50-60%, healed back up to 80, fears everybody, gets healed back up to 80 again. It just is a massive waste of time. And they have to look at the Sap and the Hibernate are actually going to start wearing off in a second. And those are on Sards. So the second they start breaking out of those, the infested breaks, or sorry, the mob breaks at SUC, and they start jumping towards the targets already. They had 3 seconds left onto that Hibernate there. So really close timing. If it actually healed a little bit more, you start to have Sards jumping back in, start healing up the Sky Screamers again, and just wasting even more time.
But we see Spaghetti done with trash, completely cleared. Looks like they did completely clean trash clears on this side. So now they only have the 2 bosses left. And they did commit their lust to this trash pull on this side. We can see they have their bloodlust timer on cooldown. So all they have left are these 2 bosses.
Yeah, they did a great job pulling together not only the patrol right in front of Alunza, but also the side pack as well, and doing a great job. Again, kiting out the mobs, keeping them out of Sanguine. And one of the big things was also watching Subo, the Boomkin on the side of Spaghetti, baiting out any of the charges from the Juggernauts, but also keeping them away from the Sanguine piles, making sure they're not charging through any of the Sanguine puddles along the way and just prolonging the pull, because often when you're having any of those Juggernauts charging out of the group, they're missing out on any of the cleave or any of the melee damage in the process of that, and it just starts taking even longer for them to die. They're getting any of those inner rage casts off, making them even more deadly. So great job there by being able to get them down, and they already got Alunza down. It's about 30%.
Yeah, and Alunza on Sanguine Week is actually one of the biggest bait boss fights, because you have Sanguine piles that typically have been dropped by the trash, and the primary mechanic of this fight is that you have to soak blood pools on the ground to corrupt the healing that Priestess is doing. And if you're not paying attention, it's pretty easy to stand in the Sanguine pile and not in the actual blood pile and kill yourself. So
it sounds like you have some intimate experience with that one.
Yeah, that's recent.
recent little scar
examples.
Okay, it's all right. Great job here by Spaghetti, getting Alunza down very rapidly here, as struggling to be able to catch up and get back into this game here. Spaghetti approaching Yasma, waiting for the last of the RP for the bridge to be able to, for the stairs to be able to open up, having to dodge some massively difficult spiders here as they're charging up the stairs. Oh, very close there by Subo, almost.
Yeah, great example of showing boss mechanics before you actually get to the boss. Love how Blizzard does that sometimes.
Oh, right you are here, as we're seeing Spaghetti engaging with Yasma, having a final boss here. Important to watch out for any of the spider spawns, and since we're on Fortified, we don't have to worry about too many of them coming up too rapidly here, as we will have the boss being burned down pretty rapidly, as we're seeing OokOok taking on, trying to get back into this game, having the very aggressive pull that they need to be able to start catching up a little bit on trash. But at this point, it looks like it's going to be a little bit too little too late.
Yeah, even if they do pull this off clean, I don't think there's really much chance for them coming back. The other team would have to wipe maybe twice to this. So there's not really too much they can do. They can only just pull clean and hope the other team messes up.
Team Spaghetti just doing a great job keeping all the spiders out. They're only having 1 range DPS, so often not too bad for them to just be able to get all the spiders in a pretty central location there, and everybody was be able to dodge. You have to watch out for those soul rens, which are going to be spawning those little copies, little clones of characters. They're going to rush into the boss. If they actually do end up hitting the boss, it'll start pulsing and putting a massive dot onto all the players. But again, like I said, it's unfortified. The mobs die very rapidly here, and all you have to really be doing is watching out for the echoes of Shadra, the little spiders that are going to be coming out there. So not too bad for them. Already below 30% here for Team Spaghetti, just doing very strong performance. Just about 4 deaths there, but overall it's been pretty clean.
Yeah, they looks like they had some jitters early on in the dungeon with their first couple pulls, but it looks like they pulled it together pretty.
Excellent job here. They're probably kiting out the last of the soul runs that they have to end up doing, trying to keep them as central as they can. Subo could have been a little bit closer here, but with how easily they all die when you're able to take advantage of the death and decay, massive upfront slow there, makes it very easy, in the double knockbacks as well to be able to get it down. So great job here by Team Spaghetti, taking on Game 1 and the +2E on its Alvazar.
Where's the loot?
Team OokOok,
Show me the
perhaps a
loot.
little true to their name in this dungeon. They followed their hearts, but they missed a couple of kicks and had a couple of sloppy pulls. Very close to getting the dungeon, or quickly spiral out of control. I guess kind of a silly question, perhaps, but JB, what exactly went wrong for these boys in this dungeon?
Well, I think I don't know that the death counts from if I saw correctly. I don't know if the death counts were terribly different between the teams. But I think you saw the pull in my mind that sticks out as being perhaps pivotal was before the trash pack before Volcall running across the bridge with the honor guard that kind of got out of control with the infested stalker that came in. It's a pull that you don't normally see teams do even on live. Like you sometimes see teams do more aggressive pulls in on lower keys that you wouldn't normally see on live, because sometimes the things that are threatening on live are not things that are threatening on lower level keys. But even in a lower level key, I think that's not a trash pack you'd want to pull because of the reanimated honor guard, and then having the infested stalker coming in the middle of it caused it to be essentially undoable. And instead of just dumping the pull and moving on, instead of committing to the wipe and moving along with it, there was an attempt to try to kind of save that pull. And so I think that when you find yourself in a situation like that, it's you have to learn when to sort of pull the plug and just wipe and move on.
All right, so we have the MDTs available, so we can take a look at the Mythic Dungeon tools for Team Spaghetti as they went through the dungeon, and we can see how they navigated this dungeon. It wasn't quite as we've talked about during the game a little bit. Though on live, you don't quite have the ability to practice these specific dungeons, these specific pools, quite as well as you do with access to the tournament realm with more repeatable keys. But we did see a lot of innovation in the way that Spaghetti pooled, and perhaps maybe some things to even learn about how they went through the dungeon. And let's take a peek at this MDT and see how they went. So we see immediately this team goes off to the left to get their to bloodlust this left pack. JB, why do teams do this? Like, what's the goal of heading off and bloodlusting as soon as possible?
So in Atoll Desire, there's a few different ways that you could lust right out of the gate, and that's the goal in Atoll Desire, because it's a fairly short key. You want to squeeze in as many bloodlusts as possible, and so humanoids is a fairly popular. And when I say humanoids, the dungeon is kind of split up so that, as you can see, as you go south through the dungeon, there are humanoid mobs. Then as you go towards the middle of the map, there are sort of dinosaurs. You got the swords and the skyscrapers and whatnot. And then if you go north on the map, you'll move into undead trash packs on the way to Volcall. So a lot of teams will go south instantly into the humanoid packs because there's a good mob density down there, and mobs that you can pull together that don't necessarily, it's interruptible type of mobs, stuff that doesn't get out of control. So you can do a big first pull there. You see 2 packs of humanoids that can be pulled together pretty consistently. And when you lust that, it lets you just clump these things up and get that lust on cooldown instantly.
And
I
something
like how they also.
Sorry, go ahead, Jack.
I like how they're also able to, if you are able to zoom in or focus onto like that south side, as you mentioned, you're able to actually have one of the skyscreamers who is down below, just a full floor below them. You're also able to actually start pulling one of those up, and they were able to quickly grab that and add it onto the pack, because they did end up kind of splitting it in two, where they were first dealing with the 2 packs up front with the humanoids. Then they were moving on to the Confessor, the Augur, and the Juggernaut, as well as the Skyscreamer down below them. So they're able to kind of split the pull into 2 to make sure they're keeping it safe and consistent, while also being able to get a little bit of extra trash percentage here and there, because it is quite a pain to be actually going down that trash pack near Razan's room, because you either go to the right side to kill the little Sarids, or you go to the left side and you have the double Skyscreamers. So being able to pull one from just a complete floor above is so consistent, because what will happen is you just go down, you tag it, it instantly starts flying up to you, trying to get to your location, and then you're able to actually kill it very quickly. So it's nice to be able to get that little bit extra trash percentage, because whenever you're making your routes for these dungeons, it can be kind of a pain to get that, like, a little bit of extra trash here or there, usually like 2 or 3% or something. And that Skyscreamer is really what's going to help you out.
And the dive bombing onto the first boss, boys. What do we think about this way to pull Razan? Normally, when you pull him straight from the gates, you diagonal and you dive bomb him. But looping around from the right is pretty neat. Do you think a team would ever loop around from the left to dive onto Razan in his room? JB?
I mean, a lot of times, I don't know that it really matters which way you approach Razan from. even with his pat timing, I don't know that it's a big deal. Even if you catch him on the other side of the room, usually you can adjust to wherever his pat is. But typically, I think you only ever see teams pull him either right at the start of the dungeon, or usually if you're gonna wait, you'll do it after you get done with Volcall, and then as you start to cross the bridge, you'll drop down.
And so OokOok, of course, they did that, pulling the first boss right off the gate. And then we saw a couple of things go wrong from them, almost perhaps right out of the gates. They went and they got a couple of casts off on the left side. A lot of damage was going out. Jack, what is happening? Or I guess let's do this ironic. What's happening over on the left side when the team OokOok was dealing with all the damage coming out of those casts at the beginning of this dungeon?
Well, we didn't actually see it on our main screen, but what I'm assuming happened is they had a mantle cast go off, and then they had a mob die inside the mantle with another mob on top of it. So they had a mob sitting, free casting, and sanguine, probably healed, which slows down the pull immensely. You can't have that happen, obviously. So that probably lost them 30 to 45 seconds of time.
You hate to see that. And then OokOok had a couple of other things. We saw a really innovative pull from them on the left side with the Saurids, where they managed to pull off the CC on the second small Saurid pack and pull them together. But perhaps maybe this took a little bit long to set up. What kind of communication, as ironic, is going on in team comms in practice as well as in execution, setting up a big CC pool like that?
Well, usually you have it set down to the point where like the person who's doing the CC is just going to say, all right, I'm going. And then they'll say ready and you'll pull. It's usually just like a 1, 2, 3, and it usually takes 5 to 10 seconds tops. It looks like they were just kind of like, well, we're going slow, so we should do something big here. And it took them way too long to set up, and it was very sloppy and didn't work out that well for them.
And also resulted in just the extra cast going off from the skyscraper.
Right.
You know, having half the HP of 2 skyscreamers being regenerated really from just sanguine, and they had plenty of interrupts left at their disposal, and just missing a kick or something like that. You just can't have that. You know, it's one of those things that when you're making those extremely aggressive plays, you have to be able to, you know, for one, like mentioned, practice it in advance, know what you need to be looking out for, but also just make sure everybody knows and everybody's on the same page as to the interrupts and whose responsibility it is to be able to shut those mobs down.
All right, so we're back here with the desk with everybody, and this is of course still a best of 3 series. We do have some more maps ahead of us. We'll be heading next into the Freehold dungeon. There's a lot that you can do in Freehold to make up time here and there, and a lot to go wrong. Do you guys think OokOok has what it takes to pull it back together, or do you think that Spaghetti has this one in the bag?
I think in this situation, since we're pretty much seeing people run their life strats on keys, yeah, we can absolutely see them come back and do it. It's not like these teams are like super practiced and have super, laid out strats for both of these dungeons. So I'm interested to see what they can pull off in this next dungeon.
Something to mention really briefly about Freehold is that even though it has now been patched on live in 8.1, we did tell these teams ahead of time that we're not allowed to set up any of the pre-RP in these dungeons. So there is that even playing field without bugs that they're doing in this race setting. All right, so go ahead, JB.
Yeah, I think when you compare the team performance in Atal Azar to Freehold, Atal Azar is, for the most part, sort of a solved instance, I think. There are trash packs that you just specifically don't want to do. Typically anything with like on the humanoid side, you're going to try to avoid the Colossus, and on the undead side, you're going to try to avoid reanimated honor guards. And it's pretty well defined which packs you want to do in Atal Azar. It's just a question of which order you do them in. Whereas in Freehold, there's legitimately a lot of different trash that's available to do, and a lot of trash you can pull together. And the RP event even splits up some of the trash packs once you've started it. So you can even sort of tailor the trash halfway through the dungeon to get the pulls that you want by getting rid of some of the mobs by starting the RP. So I think you could see much more variation in the way that teams pull Freehold, and a lot more could happen in this dungeon. You can pull a lot more aggressively and make big plays.
To remember about these dungeons also is, since these keys were done on live, we're going into Freehold with the same axes before. It will be again necrotic and sanguine in Freehold. What are some of the things teams have to look out for, especially maybe healers and tanks in the necrotic and even sanguine setting in Freehold, Jack?
I think a lot of Freehold is about space, being able to create space for your tank to be able to kite, to be able to move around, and a lot of times having the escape routes as well. often after you actually end up killing Sky Captain Crag, you're moving across the first bridge. You see a lot of teams, instead of going right in towards the event, starting up the event to be able to start the second boss, the Council of Captains. A lot of times they move to the right, they kind of dodge around a lot of mobs, and then they go into Council of Captains' room, start clearing a lot of trash there. That way they have room to kite, especially away from Sanguine, especially if necrotic stacks are getting a little bit too high. And it gives them a lot of space to be able to pull everything else from there and then use that open area to their advantage. So that's probably what I'll be looking for, is how they're going to maximize their space in the room. A lot of times if they just go and start engaging with the mobs right after they get out of the bridge area, they're just tightly packed into a corner. It makes it much more difficult to work with.
Okay, and so there's nothing left to do but to see what happens in Freehold. Take it away, Sierra, as we enter the Freehold to see if OokOok can be freed or Spaghetti will seal the deal.
All right, it's ironic. JB is hoping the team Spaghetti can seal this out, and OokOok will not have an oof on this Freehold.
Oh God, I'm actually looking. I really want to see a game 3 here, so I'm hoping that OokOok can bring it back.
Yeah, most definitely here. We have to watch out for Lightning, especially. Big changes coming in to Lightning, a couple of Freehold bosses with 8-1. Lightning spawning in a totally random location, but taking a little bit longer to land here. So this is the last time, maybe last time ever, we'll see Lightning going into that same consistent spot.
Yeah, hopefully we see a nice big pull with Lust here on the start. Hopefully, I want to see them bullies 4 mobs on the right with the Enforcer pack on the left. That's what I like doing on Fortified in this dungeon.
Well, a lot of times you see that on live keys because Death Knights were able to pull with D&D and get rid of the infested mob, but it's a bad infested pattern this week, I think, where you have an infested mob right in the start there, and it can be tough to pull all that together.
Well, they ended up doing that big pack.
Yeah, like how we're able to see, still able to use your cooldowns here on that first pull, getting Bloodlust used very quickly in Sky Captain Crag's room in order to actually end up spawning the boss here. So a lot of the quick line of sight you had to be watching out for to pull those Corsairs and the powder shots in very quickly. Doing a great job there. I like being able to see the Ring of Peace coming up, keeping those mobs away, and also bumping them out of the Sanguine puddle there. Make sure they're creating space here for the Monk tank on the side of OokOok. Very good job. You'll start moving them and not wasting any kind of extra time here. So especially on the side of Spaghetti when they had that double pull that they were doing, making space for themselves and also not covering the entire boss's room and Sanguine's going to be very important for them.
Yeah, OokOokSquad also opting for a much smaller pull and saving their Lust for the boss, it looks like. So I'm curious to see how that differs on their boss kill pull time here.
Yeah, especially on a fortified setting when the boss should be able to go down pretty rapidly there. You're also seeing on the side of OokOok, you have an Axel very far out, so it's going to be kind of a pain if any of the melee does, or sorry, if Axel is ended up targeting by the charge there. But they do actually end up dismounting him very rapidly here, so they just have to make sure that Axel's going to be out of range of the powder shot there. But he is lined up at the same time with the rogue, so you're actually able to see on Axel's side, he's lined up at the same position as the rogue, so if it actually ended up targeting him, the rogue will get hit, it'll take quite a bit of damage from the powder shot, and can actually be pretty dangerous when you have to worry about any of shark bait actually, defiling any of the melee there.
Yeah, we see this Boomkin actually likes the team that he's running with. He's standing inside the ring as opposed to standing outside of it, which would allow him to just dodge bird cast and the spit from the bird as well. So good team play from the Boom.
Is it spit or?
Yeah, sure. Let's go with that.
All right, okay. You just spit then. Okay, no problem at all there. We're seeing about equal health there in terms of boss percentage. Having to compare using Lust versus not using Lust. You have a little bit of advantage on the side of OokOok, but the bosses are going down around the same time here. So both teams looking to be neck and neck going into this, making sure they're going to be able to get Captain Crag down quick and easily, having to continue kiting through any of that vile coating there as rapidly as they can. And then, of course, watching out for the powder shots, dropping Zuin very low there. They have to make sure they're just getting him topped off quickly, easily, getting some damage into it, and then being able to move on as best they can. I think they did end up having a death as well.
Yeah, they did. And it definitely affected their boss kill time there. They ended up killing the boss behind, even though they committed their Lust to the boss. And they're also behind on mob count, so a net loss for them.
Yeah, not a great start for OokOok. Use the Lust and still come out behind on enemy forces. But yeah, I think at this point now you're going to start seeing where the pulls for teams can start to vary a lot more from this point on in the dungeon, and you get a lot of these really big trash packs coming up, and I'd expect to see some teams do double and triple pulls, and you might even see some wipes happen here with Infested and Sanguine. A lot of these pulls can get real tricky. Tanks can get harpooned back in and unable to reset their necrotic stacks, or you can get Sanguine that becomes difficult to kite out of.
Yeah, and like we were talking about earlier, they're having moving on to the right side of the room here on the side of Spaghetti, making sure that they're going to be able to start creating some space for themselves. They have to get on top of those spawns of Gahoon at the same time. We are watching on the side of OokOok in the bottom left. They are ended up actually pulling a lot of these mobs onto the bridge. So important to note is they're having to watch out for a lot of these duelists and the charges they'll have, because they're going to charge onto Axel, who's sitting on the bridge right now. He's going to have to step back, but everybody else in melee is going to have to start moving on towards the tank. And right here, you have this situation where they're just kiting all those mobs through the Sanguine. They knocked them back into Sanguine again. Bit of miscommunication as to where they wanted those mobs to end up going. That's just wasting a little bit more time on the side of OokOok. And that's one of the dangers, again, of having these mobs on and kiting any of the mobs on the bridge itself, is just you just lack so much space. It makes it so much more difficult to be able to quickly and efficiently take them down.
It's one of those things where if you're able to pull it off, you leave this entire middle area open for big pulls later on. But if you mess it up, it gets messed up really bad. Mobs will get healed all over the place. It looks like they pulled it off pretty well. Nothing really healed too much or at all. So they left themselves a lot of space to do a big pull here right after.
And they have to watch out for any of the infested coming up with that vermin trapper. And also important to note, the event that they're having is going to be the brawl. So there are going to be tons of mobs coming in here. A dangerous pull going to be coming up for Team Spaghetti as they are pulling in all the brawlers, making sure they're able to get everyone in together. You saw a really early Chaos Nova coming up, even before they got any of the Scrappers in together or the Knuckle Dusters in together. Might be a little bit scary when they have to watch out for the Blind Rages coming up, because they're going to be lacking that AoE stun that'll help interrupt any of those coming out. Looks like you get to get, I believe it was the Meta Stun, Metamorphosis Stun, to be able to start interrupting those quickly. But then you have to keep on watching for any of the Duelist dashes that are coming up. Which, if they're ended up targeting the healer, they're ended up targeting the range DPS, can start charging through all of melee, putting out big stuns onto them, and just making things a lot more difficult than they have to be.
I think you're seeing both teams here now kind of curiously utilizing this bridge, which is probably never a place you want to be to begin with in this dungeon, but especially on Sanguine Week, kiting these mobs through the bridge with the Sanguine piles is going to be dangerous. And you're seeing both teams hanging around here, which I would assume they'd both be trying to get away from this as fast as they could.
Absolutely. And you're also seeing, the results of that. It's a big amount of healing that they're having to do. They're more than halfway across the bridge, so they're going to have to backtrack regardless here. How long it's taking, and you see so much healing going on to that last Scrapper. It seems like the pull is just not quite worth it. And not quite worth the extra effort, the extra damage taken from standing in the Sanguine, from having to heal up the Sanguine, any of that stuff.
Yeah, but even if there was a decent amount of healing, they didn't wipe. They didn't, nothing catastrophic went wrong. So while it wasn't necessarily the cleanest pull, they did at least kill it relatively quick. One or two ticks isn't going to make it, make or break your dungeon time.
That's also
but it does come down to those small things.
Definitely comes down to a lot of the small things there. We have to watch for, like previously in the Atal Bazaar, where they didn't end up wiping on that stalker that came into the group and then started infesting other mobs, right? But just consuming so much extra time there when they're having, both teams making sort of the same play. But those kind of things mean all the difference of the world when you're trying to get these things done as fast as possible there. So pulling up all the deck hands, taking down any infested all at once here. Looks like they're just making themselves lots of room to be able to work with in this room. And playing it pretty passively, pretty safely here so far, not actually having any huge pulls or anything on the side of OokOok.
Well, they just did that relatively large pull, so now they're pretty much going to be waiting for the cooldowns to come back off cooldown, and once they're off cooldown, they'll do another big pull. That's typically how it goes in this dungeon. You'll want to pull, like JB was saying earlier, you want to pull 2 or 3 packs at a time when you have cooldowns up, and then just do smaller pulls while you're waiting for them to come off cooldown.
Yeah, it's kind of curious. The RP, OokOok getting the RP out of the way instantly in here, and Spaghetti, I think, doing the same. And as I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, there's packs later in this dungeon that have mobs that will go neutral when you do the RP event, which cuts down on the number of mobs that you can still get mob count from later on in this dungeon. And a lot of teams will opt to save the RP event till later so that you can pull bigger at this point of the dungeon where some of these packs are really big. So this will make it harder to get really big pulls set up by doing the RP this early in the dungeon.
And also interesting to see Spaghetti, pulling the Council of Captains before Bloodlust is back available. They had 2 minutes left onto it. A lot of times you'd end up seeing groups who just wait to hold Bloodlust. And I guess on a 13 fortified, it's not going to be too deadly, too dangerous for them to deal with. So maybe they're going to find that it's better served for them to use it on any of the trash packs here. OokOok has, 3 minutes left on their Bloodlust, so they're having quite a big pull coming in here, just actually pulling in the double pack. But we've seen previously, like you mentioned, when any of these mobs, we see a couple of them on the right side of OokOok. We're seeing any of these mobs that are already made neutral, already made friendly by completing the RP event. It's just a couple more mobs that they could have gotten quicker and easier percent off of, and that just starts slowing down the run a little bit because they have to go find other packs, they have to find other patrols, maybe even make more aggressive plays than they otherwise need to later on.
And I like what Spaghetti's doing here, where they pull the boss without lust, so they can have their lust up for a larger pull later. It is fortified. The boss isn't necessarily that dangerous. The Eudora doesn't really have the killing power that she has on a higher tyrannical key, so it's super safe to pull this boss without bloodlust as long as you have your cooldowns up. And they are dealing with it relatively easily, so it was definitely the right call for them to make.
But at this point, all they have to do is deal with Captain Jolly here. There's going to be a weekly rotation for any of the Council of Captains, where it's always going to rotate and have a different RP event every week. So this one was just Eudora with the Jolly. You have to watch out for some of the powder shots, as well as the grape shot, which is just going to be covering about half of the room. It slowly slices a slow cone that actually starts covering different parts of the room at a time, where she jumps into the corner there. And of course, watching out for Jolly's charge or his extremely annoying whirling blade that needs to be brought back into the boss's hitbox in order for him to sheath it again.
And it's worth noting that the Council of Captains, once you complete that boss fight, it updates your res point in the dungeon, which prior to that, you're resing in the first boss room, and it could be a really long run back, and a lot of these big pulls can be dangerous. So getting that second boss done quickly at least makes it so that if you lose someone on a trash pull, they can get back into the action quickly.
I'm definitely going to be looking for Spaghetti to do a very large pull here, since they have their bloodlust off cooldown, or at least work towards the Ring of Booty to kill that boss. It'd make a lot more sense for them to do a large pull with lust, though.
Yeah, it looks here on the side of Ook, they do have 45 seconds left on their bloodlust, but you also have to watch for the Crusher that's coming near. Looks like they got a quick distract onto it, and they're just trying to kite it back as best they can there. And decent pull that they have going up here. They do have to deal with that infested Buccaneer afterwards. So they're trying to kite away from the Crusher as it gets closer, deal with that Buccaneer that's infested, and then they'll have bloodlust back available and ready for a more aggressive pull, more aggressive play that we're going to see here, especially the side of Team Spaghetti, who already has their lust available. Looks like they're finishing up a smaller pack, and they're able to start working on that very soon.
I see OokOok just dealing with the infested mob that they had left from the 2 packs they just pulled. That's one of the biggest problems with the infested mechanic, just as a general mechanic in the game. It forces you to pull packs in ways where before you might have been able to pull them all together at once, but infested forces you to pull it in 2 packs instead of 1. It really slows the dungeon down.
Yeah, kind of splitting up the pieces of the dungeon, or having to look which packs you can actually have multiple infested crowd control while pulling the sides in together and everything like that. It does kind of stand out here, but you're seeing on the side of OokOok, they do have bloodlust back, and looks like they might just end up using it here on the boss to get it down very quickly here. But like you mentioned, with not that much danger from the powder shot that they really have to worry about, or you're having to watch out for the grape shot, which she always fires to her left, and she goes from left to right all the time. So if you're ever looking at where she's facing, she's always going to be starting moving to that right side. So not too much danger they have to worry about, but they'd also clearing that vermin trapper. So I like seeing that Ring of Peace coming down on the side of Chica to be able to actually get any of those infested away, make sure they're going to stay away from the group, and then quickly kiting Eudora and Jolly out of that range. So hoping Eudora doesn't end up jumping towards that mob. That's always one of the dangers if you're not going to end up clearing it. You also have to watch out for that big knockback there, because it can very easily knock the tank out of the room and bring the bosses out of the room, resetting the boss and just making your life a lot more difficult.
We did see on the small screen on the left, Spaghetti did end up committing their bloodlust to a relatively large trash bowl, and it looks like it went down relatively cleanly, no deaths. So they have that on cooldown now.
Yeah, I think we're going to see on a 13 that I'd be surprised if the teams get another good lust in before the end of the dungeon here. Maybe if you save it for Harlan, you could get a lust into that pull, but sometimes on these 13s it can be tricky to squeeze in as many lusts. I guess I would have liked to have seen the teams try to more aggressively get that lust on cooldown, even if it wasn't necessarily a perfect lust.
Yeah, for sure,
I think it's part of
especially
the
in
polish.
especially in like a racing scenario like this. You really want to make sure you have your lust on cooldown as quickly as possible, especially if you're getting more than 2 lusts throughout the dungeon.
Yeah, you are seeing, looks like a pretty aggressive pull coming here out of the side of Spaghetti, as they are going to end up starting the RP event. You did see, I believe it was the Rogue topping off to the right side, starting the RP event, which can take quite a bit of time, about a minute, for Lightning to actually end up spawning. So they're kind of having that timing in their head that they'll be able to kill this easily within a minute, kite out any of the mobs that did not die as quickly, getting him out of the Sanguine very rapidly, and then start dealing with Lightning before he actually does end up dropping down here. But on the side of Team OokOok, they're already moving on to Harlan Sweet instead of going on towards that Ring of Booty there. So they look like they're going to be going, taking that boss down and dealing with some of the, or actually not going to be dealing with any of the Ravager packs, because they do have to worry about the infested that are coming up with them. But it looks like somebody did end up actually pulling on accident there, so they need to make sure they take the extra time to res them. And those are the things you just hate to see, is just taking a little bit of extra time here, getting the res off, waiting until they're actually able to actually pull the boss, waste a little bit more time, and that's something that they really just can't afford.
Absolutely. We can also see that they're about 20% behind in their mob count right now. So Spaghetti's definitely been a lot more efficient with how they pulled this dungeon so far, using their lust on trash rather than on bosses. It's just a lot more efficient, especially in this fortified setting.
And you are seeing the Subo, of course, going out and chasing after any of the and the Lightning, doing a great job taking it down in 20 seconds. Keystone Masters record for catching Lightning there. Great job, but it was kind of weird seeing the DPS ended up chasing after Lightning instead of the healer doing that there.
You actually see OokOok going to Harlan instead of the Ring of Booty for their third boss. It looks like they're probably planning on using their lust on the last boss, the shark, if we can go by what they've already been doing in this dungeon, which unfortunately is not very efficient, but it seems to be their plan of attack.
Well, you may actually be able to get a fairly valued lust out of Shark Boss on a 13 fortified. I don't know that the melee will be. A lot of times, Shark Boss can be difficult for double melee comps because his tornado forces you out. But on a 13, you may be able to just stand in there and tank it.
Yeah, on a 13 fortified, I would hope you'd definitely be able to tank it, especially as a rogue.
But yeah, your healer's willing to heal you through it, if they're nice.
Harlan has 3 phases. He is occasionally a popular lust target because he has 3 phases, and the first, I believe, ends around 60%, and the second will end at 30%. But in the third phase, he starts taking increased damage, and so some teams try to use lust either to push him into that increased damage phase as fast as possible, or if you have notable patters in your group, they will save lust for that last 30% to make their meters look as juicy as possible.
And not naming any names there?
Not naming any names there.
All right. You're seeing the distract coming up onto the side of Team OokOok to make sure they're able to get the rest of the mobs through. And you will see the quick pull coming out to be able to deal with those Ravagers. That way they'll be able to quickly and efficiently move back to the Ring of Booty here after they got Harlan Sweet down. Spaghetti is working on these double crushers, which just have a massive amount of HP. Just take quite a bit of time here, but again, once it's on that 13, it's usually not too bad to deal with. And since they're not pulling them with any of the extra free hands or anything like that, they don't have to worry about little sanguine puddles just starting to form beneath their feet there. So they're able to quickly grab those, deal with them as they're waiting on Lightning, and then eventually moving on to Ludwig.
Yeah, Crusher's probably not the best pull on Fortified. They do have a ton of health. They're super annoying for melee, which, when you got double melee in your group, they Crushers drop the stones at or do the whatever stomp at their feet that forces melee to kind of keep dancing around and pay attention. And we all know how melee like to focus strictly on DPS. So it makes these pulls a little bit more difficult than they probably need to be, and there's probably more health here. So pulling them by themselves without having any additional trash going along with them is maybe not the best play on Fortified.
You can take quite a bit of extra time here, but you are seeing Team Spaghetti engaging with Trothak, the Shark Puncher. They're doing a great job there, baiting out any of the locations of the sharks and making sure they're able to quickly kite them into any of the piles of chum, start slowing them down and making sure there's less of a threat there. You are seeing on the side of the healer for Team Spaghetti taking care of the sharks, allowing their DPS to have greater focus onto just tunneling the boss and dealing as much damage as they can in their openers there. You also have to watch for, the casters as well. If you're standing too close and you need to actually end up having your healer kite into one of the chum piles, making sure the DPS is around and conscious enough to actually move away from those, give you some extra space, because the sharks will always fixate the target that is closest to them. So important to be able to have the room that you need to be able to kite without actually dragging it onto other DPSers in the process.
We did see OokOokSquad take down Harlan earlier, and before they take down the last boss, they have a lot of trash percentage to get through, so we saw them do this big double pull here, and they're probably going to do another one of those right afterwards, I'd have to imagine. They've got a lot of percentage to get through before they can take out the last boss and finish the dungeon.
At this point, they need to know that they're behind some of the extra time they've taken, or maybe it was just the route, and it wasn't as optimized as they would have liked to be able to start going into it. Spaghetti is taking down Trothak here. They have 94% of their trash taken care of, so just a quick pack that they have to deal with very quickly, and then they're able to move on to Harlan, get that boss down, and then they're sitting pretty for the
Subos did go down there at the end of that boss, so that's an extra 5 seconds. As far as trash percentage goes, they can just take care of both of these Ravager packs, and that'll take care of the rest of the percentage. So they don't really have that much left to do here in this dungeon.
Will be interesting to see, as they are double infested here, so they'll have to get out some quick CCs onto them. It might actually have to end up being like a double pull or something along those lines to be able to quickly kill all the non-infested packs very rapidly, make sure they're getting that painful motivation off, but also bringing those mobs out of range of any of the infested, so they're not going to end up healing up very quickly. Very important to make sure they're getting the interrupt out onto that oarsman whenever they're there. That's the swirling spouts cast the oarsman does pull off. It makes it very difficult to actually have the room that you need. They do end up quickly killing off any of those infested mobs and the rest of the packs. Now they just have a massive amount of sanguine to actually end up getting through there, as they're going to get the quick res off on to their rogue and be able to start moving on to Harlan Suite.
Yeah, I think that's about the cleanest I've ever seen a double Ravager pull go there. I think they did CC one of the Ravagers so that it...
okay, they got one.
Yeah, they CC'd one of them, so that the painful motivations wouldn't go on the same target, which is very good of them to do.
Yep. Always going to be able to start breaking up those packs.
Yeah, they did that very clean. So they are going to go into Harlan, and once Harlan's dead, they are done with the dungeon. Whereas OokOokSquad still has 10% of enemy forces to deal with before they can take down this last boss.
Yeah, they're waiting another 10 seconds for lightning to be able to spawn, quickly grabbing that, then start dealing with another 10% of enemy forces while killing Ludwig, who also has a massive amount of HP because he is reacting to Fortified, or he is affected by Fortified there instead of Tyrannical. So he's not giving any extra crash percentage, but does have the extra health and damage added onto it. So Spaghetti engaging with Harlan Suite here. All the trash percentage is done, and only 3 deaths on the board for them. It's in an excellent position here in game 2.
Yeah, it looks like they're going to get less back. Looks like Spaghetti's going to get less back on Harlan, which, as I was saying earlier, I think usually teams either try to hold it for the second, which is a little more hectic, and you want to get through that as fast as possible. It's the most dangerous of phases on the fight. He starts spawning cannon barrages under everyone except the tank, or maybe it's even on the tank, I don't even remember. He starts spawning a bunch of cannon barrages, and you want to get through that phase as fast as possible. They'll be entering that phase here in about 10%. Or ideally, if you can carry some of that lust into the final phase, last 30%, you can slay the boss pretty quickly from that point on.
Yeah, but I've been
told that was padding.
I've been told by a Demon Hunter that that's padding. You can't.
It is textbook padding, but not all padding is bad padding.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. As they're going into 45%, they do have Bloodlust up. They're dodging any of those cannon barrages. It's 25%, 30% that they will have 30%. Yeah, they will enter that extra damage taken phase here. So they do have about 20 seconds left of Bloodlust as they are getting into that final loaded dice phase. And very big damage that they're able to pump out here, taking it down at 23 minutes left. 23 minutes into the run at the moment here, as Spaghetti is doing a great job quickly and efficiently taking down their opponents in freehold.
Yeah, that was a pretty clean run. I didn't really see too much problems with it, other than maybe the sanguine on the bridge earlier in the dungeon. Maybe a couple deaths here and there, but other than that, very clean run.
I think the interesting thing is being able to actually look at the different routes, being able to see the loot at the end of the time. Great that we're able to end up pulling that off. But it's interesting to be able to see the different routes that the teams are going to be running with there, and how they're also comparing to what we're all used to running on live servers or even on pushing higher level keys.
And,
Yeah, I think the routes were fairly similar to what you'd see on live. I don't think there was anything that was too crazy there in terms of a difference between live versus lower level keys.
Yeah, they were
definitely.
pretty normal. Yeah.
So Team Spaghetti did not drop the spaghetti this time, but they did a great job, and they clinched this best of 3 series. What was different for Spaghetti in this dungeon compared to OokOok? What allowed them to pull so much further ahead throughout this run? Zyro.
Well, like we said throughout the dungeon, I think on Fortified Week, if you can commit your lust to doing big trash pulls instead of bosses, that'll get you so far ahead. That's definitely what they did. They committed to using their lust on big trash pulls, and they got them done efficiently and quickly, and the bosses weren't any more difficult.
And so, Jack, we saw nothing too crazy with Necrotic here in Freehold. What is it about Freehold in this tank healer dynamic that perhaps allows Necrotic to maybe not be as big of a threat as in other dungeons?
I think part of it is going to be the tools that tanks have at their disposal, and how the group is actually going to be ended up using any of their stuns or any of their slows that are available to them. They have a lot of knockbacks both teams have a lot of knockbacks at their disposal, whether it's Ring of Peace or Typhoon that they have access to, which gives them a lot of space. And being able to have, like we saw, there's more open areas. Most of their aggressive pulls, for example, were past the Council of Captains room. So they had these larger open areas at their disposal. We saw both groups, whenever they were actually ended up pulling any of the mobs onto the bridge just after Sky Captain Crags, those pulls took quite a lot longer than the later pulls where they were actually past Sky Captain Craig's room. They were past the Council of Captains room, and they just had a really big open area to be able to work with. So just a quick roll and having any kind of slows up, you're instantly able to start dropping Necrotic very easily. You're seeing a lot of times, the monk's able to roll out. He's able to start spamming Vivify onto himself, and then the healer's able to continue dealing damage, right? Apply a couple hots, let the monk roll out, starts dealing some damage there as the monk starts healing himself, drops Necrotic stacks, is able to go back in and start churning out more damage there. So I think a lot of it was how they planned their positioning around it to be able to deal with Necrotic and the room that they kind of built for themselves in the instance.
Yeah, so the really excellent job from both of these teams. And when you're doing these speed keys in the 13 realm versus we were doing those high push keys, so many of these little things start to add up and crunch on the time. What are some of those major time killers that we saw in these dungeons, JD? What was costing the most seconds for these teams?
Well, I think going back to the Atal Dazar, you saw Infested rear its head, and Sanguine to some extent, where those are two affixes that may not be lethal, they may not kill you, but a lot of times if you misplay a pull with Sanguine or Infested, it can just drag on indefinitely. And I think it cost quite a bit of time in the Atal Dazar with the pack before full call. You saw Infested just keep peeling, and it was impossible to get the infested mob out, and the trash pack just went on forever. And then in Freehold, you saw it wasn't quite. I think both teams did a fairly clean Freehold in terms of how the dungeon was. A few deaths here and there, but nothing catastrophic. But you just saw Sanguine just add a few seconds here and there to each pull. And as I mentioned during the middle of the Freehold run, seeing teams kite mobs down the bridge introduces a lot of opportunity for Sanguine to keep healing mobs up. 1 tick, 2 tick, 1 tick, 2 tick, and you end up with a pull that maybe took 45 seconds instead of 30 seconds. And that pull by itself may not have cost you the key, but you do that 3 or 4 times. And then at the end of the key, you go, man, how are we a minute behind? And you go, oh, right, well, the mob sat in Sanguine a few times. And so it's one of those affixes that, along with Infested, you just have to be very careful with your positioning. And what you pull sometimes isn't as important as where you pull it in those situations. And a lot of times teams tend to try to use the Council of Captains room instead of pulling the RP mobs in Freehold. Instead of pulling those back towards the bridge, you pull those down into the Council of Captains room, which gives you a bunch of space, plenty of room to drop Sanguine, plenty of room to keep infested mobs out. And if they do come running down, there's plenty of room to CC them in between. And so I think just positionally, maybe the teams could have been a bit cleaner with the affixes as well.
And so Zyro, the pools also varied a little bit between each teams of the dungeons. What do you think was like the defining difference between how Team Spaghetti was pooling trash packs in the dungeon versus how Team Uku pulling trash packs in these dungeons?
I don't think it was necessarily the pulls themselves that were different. It was just how they dealt with them. Spaghetti was just a lot more clean. They had less healing from Sang. They had less problems with Infested, and throughout both of the dungeons, they just were a lot more clean in general, which ended up saving them a lot more time. They just played better. The pulls are relatively similar in size and how many pulls they did, but yeah, they were just a lot more clean.
All right, and so I want to say thank you so much for the whole Mythic Plus community out there for our first trial of the Season 0, Episode 1 of the Keystone Masters event. We hope to be able to bring a lot more of these events to you in the future. Stay tuned to make sure that you guys follow everybody on Twitter and also on Twitch. Show these boys your love and support. We want to see there's so much exciting Mythic Plus coming to everybody in the future. I hope that everyone stays tuned, and because this is only just the beginning. Any final statements, boys?
Yeah, had a great time being a part of this, and especially at the start and the prologue of the more community Mythic Plus events, and hopefully we'll be able to get to see more in the future and see just the great competition that can be had, especially having NA versus EU or bring Oceanic into the table. The possibilities of what can be pulled off by just having community events. So having people come by and support that is just definitely incredible.
And I'd like to thank both teams, Team Spaghetti and Team Ukuk for participating, because it was well-run keys. Like, it was good competition, and there's some effort involved from the teams to get these keys put together. So I want to thank them for being our guinea pigs for this first one, because I know that some of this stuff on live keys can be kind of difficult.
As ironic,
yeah, especially they. I know how much of a pain it is to get the right keys together. So thanks to both of the teams for actually spending their time putting that together. It was a lot of fun to cast this. It was hope to see more of this in the future.
All right, and so that's a wrap, guys. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Stay tuned on social media for the next event. Hope to bring a lot more of these to you guys soon. Take it easy, everyone.
you